right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, regardless of where you are joining us from. I am glad to bring you session number 3, I think is it, of the HR Tech Couch Club. So this week or this month, actually, it has been a series of very, very interesting conversations pertaining to the two words. AI agents, agentic AI, depending on how you want to flip it and the language that you use to flip those two words around. I was actually just backstage with our panelists, and literally I had a moment where I'm like, okay, maybe we just record the backstage session and just roll right into it. Because I think the conversations around this topic is super, super interesting. This is also going to be one of the first sessions where I need to disclaim that we are having this conversation February 27th, 2025. As of this date, all of our opinions are time-stamped as of this date. So if you're watching the recording on YouTube or anywhere else, just keep that in mind. Also, this is probably going to be one of the very, very few sessions that I host that I think we're going to walk away with more questions and points of view and debate than we will with answers. But I am super, super excited. So if you are joining us on LinkedIn Live, I am going to ask you to help me with a tech test right now because I am not on the LinkedIn platform. So you're going to just type into the comments, let us know where you are calling from, and how did you take your coffee this morning? I'm assuming by this time everyone should have at least had their coffees, unless you're in Hawaii. But let's hope you woke up early this morning and had your coffee or beverage of choice. So with that said, I am going to introduce our panelists. First and foremost, Adam, welcome. Do you want to give a quick introduction of yourself and then we'll go from there?
Sure, sounds good. So thank you so much for having me. Y'all, the three of you are inspirational. Like I love what you're doing in this space, Lydia. So I wanna lead with that. But I'm Adam Treitler. I've been in the HR tech space for about 10 years. I went to school for poetry, as most of us who work in HR did as well. But I also happened to study AI and machine learning in college, and I just kind of want to like bring that up because that is some of the background that I have here. I studied under a professor, Jim Marshall, who was a disciple of a man named Marvin Minsky, who was involved in a lot of the early designs of AI. I came at it from like a policy and philosophy lens, not a science lens, but I have that background. I worked at Viacom CBS, which is now Paramount, in recruiting and recruiting technology and operations and analytics for 7 years. Then I worked for a tiny little tech company called Twitter, and did that for a little bit before Elon Musk came and kind of shook things up a bit. But I've always been focused on growth. I like to come into companies that are growing, figure out how can they scale their technologies. From there, I went into consulting for about 1.5 years with a couple different companies, recruiting advisors and JM Associates, focused on both kind of enterprise HR tech implementation and process optimization or process innovation. So how do we make work better and more effective and efficient? Now I'm at Pandora Jewelry, where I've been for about 10 months, so almost a year, working on their HR tech systems here in North America.
Awesome. We should totally start this conversation with Adam versus AI on creating a poetry about agentic AI. I'm just putting that out there right now.
Episode 2.
Exactly. All right. We have Abdullah from Nigeria and juice. Ooh, I need to know what kind of juice this is. Joseph from Pandora Corporate Office in New York with coffee, cream, and one equal. Joseph, if you are part of the team that Adam has gathered in a conference room to watch him do this, please give us a little thumbs up and let us know. All right, Mercedes, over to you.
Yeah, I need better friends, Joseph. I think that Adam like maybe forced you to listen, but thank you for coming and I appreciate that. And hi, Sonali too. Yes, Mercedes Sullivan. I am the Vice President of People Transformation with McKinley Companies and it's workforce housing. And I love it. I've been here for 5 weeks, but it's like my dream job. But before that, I spent about 10 years at TIA, so Retirement Services. And the bulk of it was doing HR PMO, so deploying end-to-end any HR tech, HR programs, and all of those fun things that integrate seamlessly. Sort of. And yeah, just really excited about what's coming up and the confusion that we all have around it. So happy to be here.
No kidding. All right, Martha, over to you.
Hello, everyone. So I have an extensive HR background, having worked across different industries, including some kind of internal consultant roles, everything from recruiting all the way to talent management and HR chief of staff, all that kind of stuff. about 5 years ago, I decided to learn data science. And so learn everything I could learn at the time about machine learning and AI and so forth. Granted, a lot has changed in the last 5 years. So I am reskilling and upskilling in terms of learning how all of this new AI works. So that's going to be a theme you're going to hear throughout the day. But at the moment, I work primarily in the people analytics space and doing advanced analytics, including some machine learning algorithms and so forth. But I try to read and hear and listen to anything I can about AI. I write articles about how to really build AI into processes and stuff like that. So that is kind of me. And now back to you, Lydia.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Martha. And for those of you listening to us for the first time today, my name is Lydia. I am the creator behind Whoops Did I Think That Out Loud, HR tech industry for about 15 years at this point. Also a self-designated poster child of what do I want to be when I grow up. Still figuring that part out. But super excited to be here. So if this is the first time you're listening to us, Martha, Mercedes, and myself brought this together after a very lengthy LinkedIn conversation that was probably, I think, about a month long last fall, if I remember this correctly. And we basically said this industry needs a unsponsored, absolutely candid take on what on earth is going on here. So that's what we aim to bring you at the HR Tech Couch Club. This is an open conversation. It's not pre-recorded. So yes, we are seeing all of your comments live. Any questions, comments, or thoughts as we progress in this conversation, please share those on the LinkedIn comments and they will pop up in the chat box for us. So like I said, this one is going to be a little bit different because none of our previous conversations, I had to walk in and say, guys, I think we might need to set a little bit of context and parameters and sandbox as to what we are talking about. So everyone, and I mean literally everyone in HR tech, and probably the AI industry right now has a thing of what is AI agents and a different definition of that and what is agentic AI. So for the purposes of conversation today, again, end of February 2025, this is how we're framing our conversation. This is how we collectively, because we've done some pre-work in this, are seeing the evolution of sort of AI, agentic AI, so on and so forth. So taking us back in time in the 1800s during the Industrial Revolution, it's been people doing things, right? It's been us pushing paper, and we just automated how we push paper, and we have essentially automated into digital paper pushing. Now, around about the 80s, 90s, you saw the first wave of chatbots coming about called expert systems, so on and so forth. And essentially, it's a set of scripted conversation with preset rules. A lot of the chatbots we saw in the early 2010s and around sort of even the beginning of the 2020s, I would say, are natural language processing AI, but not Gen AI as we know it today. Come November 2022, the whole world kind of got turned upside down a little bit, where we have I call them the Gen AI chatbots, courtesy of Martha. She was one who's like, yeah, you should probably put that in there because they are LLMs, except because of the user interface in which we use to interact with like a Claude, a ChatGPT, or Perplexity, they still feel like chatbots to us. It's almost like a human-like interaction with a machine, essentially. Now we are pivoting into AI agents, which is really kind of looking at something that will be able to make decisions and take actions more autonomously in a more streamlined manner. And eventually we're looking into pivoting into a system of agentic AI, which is essentially self-directed AI systems that set goals, adapt with human oversight. I think agentic AI is sort of the doom and gloom, if you will, a little bit, that all of us are kind of waiting and crossing our fingers and hoping doesn't happen. But with that in mind, Adam, I'm actually going to pass it off to you to kind of talk about the characteristics of AI agents, and then we can kick off our conversation from there.
Sure, of course. Thank you for that, Lydia. Yeah, so what is an AI agent? I think one of the things that Lydia kind of prefaced with is everything we're recording right now in 6 months, everything might change, right? How we're working, what we're calling things. I think also for some context, right? I did a little bit of research right before this call. The phrase agentic AI did not appear basically in a single quarterly report up through Q3 of 2024. And then in Q4 2024, largely among Fortune 500 companies, there was a 250% increase in mentions of agentic AI. So this is very new in terms of how we're looking at it from a business perspective. But from a historical perspective, the concept of AI agents have been around since about the 1950s, when Alan Newell and Herbert Simon proposed what they called the physical symbol system. Since then, we've also seen other proposals around agents like Rodney Brooks' subsumption architecture, and Stuart Russell and Peter Norvig, who kind of wrote the big AI textbook in the 90s, also described what they called rational agents. So for those of you who are like, whoa, this came out of nowhere, people in the data, in the machine learning space and the computer space have been talking about this for a long time. We just now have the capabilities to start seeing what this might look like. So what defines an AI agent? Autonomy is kind of number one, right? It needs to be something that operates without continuous human input. That's why some of the tools that have just been released, like Claude's browser tool that will take over your browser, and OpenAI's operator, aren't really agents. There may be agent-like, but they're not really agents because they constantly come back to you, ask you to do things for them, ask them if it's okay. They're not really operating 100% continuously. On top of that autonomy, they need to exhibit goal-directed behavior, right? So they're pursuing a specific objective. You're giving them a task. You're saying, get this thing done. And you're not telling them each step along the way, right? They're able to figure out the steps along the way and execute that and get it done. They have environmental awareness. So if you deploy an agent somewhere and you decide to update something, you decide to change one of the web pages that it usually navigates, it needs to be able to dynamically adapt to that, right? It can't just be like, uh-oh, you changed this little line of code, I'm going to fail. Like anyone who's ever scheduled a cron job in the past, right? And then a single line of code gets updated somewhere and it just stops working. It needs to be action oriented, right? So agents need to initiate actions, right? They're not just spitting out text, right? They're actually doing something. They're physically interacting with software. Theoretically, these could be robotic agents, right, that actually interact with the physical world in the future, right? So they're actually taking actions, and that leads to kind of a sequential process. And then above all else, too, they need to exhibit persistence and continuity, and this is something that we haven't seen a lot of yet in this space, and it will be very interesting in both the HR space and the broader business context and world to see how this works. But they need to have memory, right? They need to kind of be able to maintain their state and continuously carry out tasks over time. It's not like those things that you run on a schedule. They need to be able to run kind of anytime and execute.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. Okay, so with that in mind, that's enough context setting. We're going to toss that out the window. We might even toss our run sheet out the window, depending on how conversations go today. So I'm going to drop the first question of the day for us here. What does this all mean for HR? So if we recall an interview that Jensen Huang of NVIDIA did a little while back, he came out and said, AI and AI agents will make IT the new HR. What does all of that mean to you? How does that statement sit with you? Whoever wants to go first.
Well,
I'm gonna take it first because I have a very strong opinion on this. I think that this notion of it has to be either or, like it's either AT that's managing it or it's HR that's managing it. And I think we're seeing this come up in different conversations and debates and so forth. Like, when are we going to get to a place where it's like a collaboration, right? It's HR and the IT or whatever, your CDO or CIO, whichever role it is that's kind of leading the charge on this. Like, we should all be working together, because I don't see the IT team saying, hey, Adam, what's your job? Let's break that down into tasks and understand which elements of that can be taken over by automation. And then how do we now update like how you do your job, like update all the processes and like the whole operating model of an HR team and so forth. Like, I don't see IT doing that, but I also don't see HR nor should they have to be technical enough and know enough about the technical side to be able to know like which agent to use and how to structure the pipeline and all of that kind of stuff, right? So why can't we use the fortes of each and work together and have our new reality that we're going to be working in?
I love that. Go ahead, Mercedes.
Go ahead. No, but I fully agree. So for me, and I've also seen a lot of posts lately of you're either with us or without us, or like this very black and white thinking. I'm like, let's calm it down here. Like, and then to decide, well, let's be human and inclusive. I'm like, well, no. So how do we, this is the era to me of cross-functional adaptation so that we can move forward together. Because before we had IT led and then we didn't understand the business or the human. Then we had HR led and then we didn't understand how people worked. So this is the perfect opportunity for me to think through how do we revisit and rethink how we even organize teams so that we can get the best of everybody and design what's going forward in the future. The concern that I'm having is that I don't see HR stepping up as much. And so if we keep falling behind and just asking questions and waiting, that's going to be taken over. And then the third point is it becomes more like a governance component of ethics, what's human, what for, do we want the human here versus not? All of those checkpoints, I still think HR has a front seat of the voice that we should be leading, and to understand also the displacements and the impact, because there's going to be a lot of disruption. But yeah, no IT.
I think
Not today.
exactly. It needs to be human centric, right? Like we keep talking about, how for AI to be most effective and also to be, it needs to be, I honestly hate the word disruption, but it needs to enable us, right? And it needs to empower us to advance. And I don't know, if you really boil things down to the simplest elements, if we have a technology that puts everyone out of a job, we don't really have a plan. Leaders can keep talking about universal basic income and things like, but we don't really have a plan. And we need to be thoughtful. We need to be human-centric and human-focused. And that has to be the priority. And one of the jokes we made when we previously talked was that, I said, instead of IT being the new HR, maybe HR should be the new IT. And I think listening to Martha talk, it's not even necessarily that. Like, I do like that idea because IT, very smart people who can build systems, but the biggest challenge, and anyone who's worked on a massive, large-scale IT project has seen the reason these tend to fail is not because the software isn't great. It's because the requirements don't really meet the human needs of the customer. And if we're going to do that with AI, we're going to have all sorts of chaos, right? You're going to have things that don't actually solve real problems, things that don't actually benefit people. So I do think, to Martha's point, it does need to be a collaboration, right? When we talk about what are some of the biggest blockers to AI adoption, to really scaling this and implementing this in today's society, it's the accessibility of it, right? It's siloed information, siloed behaviors, siloed sequences and processes. HR and IT 100% need to play nice together. I don't remember if it was Anthony Onesto or somebody else on LinkedIn, but there was something a few years ago that I saw a couple years ago about how not enough CEOs went through a CHRO path, right? Most CEOs either came through a finance path or a tech path, like on the tech side. There were other software engineers, finance, operations, business, not HR. They don't think about people. People is last on their list, and we can't do that with AI.
Yeah, for sure.
King Lydia.
So I'm curious, the audience who are listening to us, what's your take? IT as a new HR, HR as a new IT, some sort of a happy medium in between, or what does that look like? So Adam, I think it's something that you said. I'm going to take us on a slightly different path here. We are seeing a lot of technology, not even technology. We're seeing a lot of marketing and sales language, and I'm going to do a call out here from the HR tech world specifically that says, hey, we have a new AI insert title here so that your HR folks can become more strategic as they have always wanted to. I think we've also had a little minor sidebar conversation about what does that actually mean for HR? Will AI tools in and of themselves truly make HR strategic? Curious to get all of your thoughts on that one.
I think if it's executed effectively, 100%, right? If we think about what I would love to see in my previous roles, even in my current role, is, for example, payroll is such a functional, they just execute. If we could get a lot of that execution and calculation done automatically and we could reliably pay our people, that would enable payroll leaders to think, kind of like the way Anita Latink is, about how do we make payroll better, right? How do we, execute early wage access so people can kind of get paid on demand when they want to if they're hourly workers in those spaces. How do we explore alternate methods of pay, right? How do we make pay more equitable? Let's invest more in these strategies. So I think like payroll is a great example. I think there's other opportunities in spaces like comp and onboarding, anywhere where there's a lot of tasks, right? Is just we're not focused on why are we actually doing this, right? And we're so focused on that. If that's what AI can truly liberate us from, then 100% I think it can enable us to be more strategic. And I see Laura's comment, and I also agree, right? It's improving data literacy, and I think there's a dual angle for that, right? It's both better educating people, but also making data more interpretable, more understandable, right? And that's something I think that AI can also help co-facilitate.
But
Yeah,
I'm going to
absolutely.
disagree with the more strategic means low data literacy, right? I think that
Go for it, Martha.
if you want to be strategic, like being data literate and being data driven and data informed is the way to be the most effective. And otherwise, your strategy is going strictly by your gut, and that is not necessarily always going to be you get your gut, you need to include it, right? It shouldn't be 100% data, no gut or no experience. But if you're making decisions just willy-nilly based on, I think this is what we're going to do, like that's not being strategic. But I think the challenge is that if we want to just throw AI at HR as an example, since that's who we're talking about today, like who's going to take the ownership of upscaling all of those people who are very tactical and operational at this point, so that they can be more strategic? That includes being more data literate, so that when you're interacting with an AI, you know what questions to ask, how to interpret it, how to understand if it's something that's legit or this smells funny, you need to go back and check those numbers. Like, then they can be more strategic. But I think, are companies going to do that? Is the government going to do that? Or no, us as professionals, we have to own it and find the training, leverage whatever resources we have through our company, but do it on our own time, find the time, because otherwise, guess what? Whoever doesn't do it are going to be the ones that are finding themselves not having a job, right?
AI is going to do it. So I have to kind of, I understand the strategic meaning. So we are higher level and we have a vision and what have you, but I've always struggled with the strategic versus tactical, because to me it's about value. And honestly, a lot of the things that I'm annoyed at the AI is that it's taking my tactical stuff that adds a lot of value. So it's the, where do we add the value? And that's where we focus on. So, but for me, it's again in the thinking, Adam, to your point, and how do we make it better and to the benefit of the human, which is where I go back to the human design thinking and empathy and all of those human skills. I don't like soft skills, the human skills. But Martha, 100% agree with you, because if this is happening and it's moving so fast, and then we're laying off people, and then they're like, HR, you're responsible. I'm like, what do you mean? You just fired everybody. So who? It's just a lot, and that's why we need to be thoughtful, Adam, exactly as you say, the displacement, it's a big responsibility that we have to take seriously. I get really annoyed when people are like, move over. If you're not in it, you're changing your mindset. No, it's because I know as a minority that when you fix now, hey, US government, I see you, you fix now and break it, and then you break it now and break it back later, you know who's gonna get hurt. So I went on a rant of like 5 different things at once. But yes, I think it's going to make us more strategic if we do it right. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the tactical things are not adding value. We do need to make sure that we're keeping up with the skills. Who doesn't, Martha? I have not individually, but also HR.
I think one really quick thing too that I want to chime in on, kind of bringing what you just said together, Mercedes, with what Martha said and with Laura's comment, is kind of what I would love to see AI do is enable people with HR backgrounds to have a bigger seat in the C-suite, to have a bigger seat, in front of those stakeholders, because I think oftentimes the reason that that group is left out is because they don't have as strong data, compelling cases. They're not looking at the finance numbers. They're not looking at the sales numbers where things are a little more black and white. So if AI can help us operationalize that and tell that story more effectively, that could be a huge win, but it really depends how we implement it and kind of at what level.
Yeah, for sure. I think from my perspective, I'm optimistic of what AI can do in HR from a strategic level, because I know theoretically we've been advocating that for about decades at this point. I'm also genuinely scared for HR professionals. In like a very deep down gut feel, I am scared for the profession sense, because we've been using that strategic banner for a very long time. Do we as a function even know what it's like to be strategic anymore? Have we been trained, certified, and everything else in being strategic? And are we able now, kind of like, you've basically plucked a goldfish out of the fish tank and you kind of stuck it in a river or an ocean at this point? Are we able to survive in that world where AI is not nice to have. It's almost a necessity. And on top of that, you have someone who's been in an environment where they really haven't had the need to hustle up on the technology side, on the data side, or anything else along those lines. So that actually moves us into the next part of the conversation, which is, how do you think HR roles and operating models will change with the rise of AI agents and agentic AI, not just in terms of how it will actually impact, because I think we're still on the waiting and seeing part of that, but just in terms of the perception of it?
So, go ahead, Martha.
I would say the perception, probably people who are still learning about AI, we'll say it that way. The perception is probably, okay, this is going to come and it's going to take my job, which is why you're going to get a lot of resistance. Lydia, you posted recently about the whole like trust factor, and if employees think that this AI is going to come and take my job, that's going to impact things quite a bit. The reality is, I would say, especially within the HR space, there, with regulations and everything coming, the definition that Adam gave at the beginning, where they're fully autonomous and they don't necessarily need a human to like interact along the way. I don't see HR, at least within an HR space, I don't see us getting there anytime soon, because maybe for some things like processing tickets, or, I need to update my address, or I need to update my beneficiaries and things like that. But, the real big things that most of your kind of higher level HR business partners are spending their time on, those things, like, you're still going to need them to be heavily involved, because otherwise you can't just turn over pay rise decisions and promotion decisions and stuff like that to an agent. It's going to be very, very dangerous, right? And so I think that, at least in the short term, I don't see, I see a lot of the roles that are already being outsourced to maybe lower income countries and stuff like that. I think those are going to be the ones that are probably the most at risk, as opposed to the ones that are supposed to be strategic. To your point, Lydia, I think those are going to be harder and take a little bit more time.
Yep, totally hear you.
I don't know. I literally don't know anything, because every time I think I know, somebody's like, oh, we just created this thing that does something magical. And I'm like, ooh, and I get really excited. And then I remember when we did things like that in practice, it actually didn't work. Because remember, we're talking to people that are selling the story of this is how it works and it's amazing. Or people are trying to sell you fear so that you can buy their services. That doesn't mean that this is not a future that we want to go to, and it's going, absolutely. But I am having a really hard time understanding what's true and what's not, and what's realistic and scalable. One of the bigger systems that just launched a thing to manage all these agents in the future cannot even manage access to the humans and have the data correct. It's a big challenge. Like, literally, it's a really big challenge. So I just think when people start doing their own thing, and Priya, I see your comment on here about everybody owning their stack. But if we do that, imagine the downstream impact if we're not doing it in an integrated way. So I do think there's room for this. I'm excited for it, but we need to do it thoughtfully. And I like that we're starting with like smaller chunks of agents that do things, so that we even know how we organize around it and govern them. And the compliance, and is there a data leak? If one thing goes rogue, what do? We have so many questions. Then we can go real fast. But for a hot minute, please, let's just, does it work?
I think one of the challenges, and it's like exactly who drives this, right? Maybe a really ambitious CHRO somewhere, is that we need to structure work differently, right? Like, It's not just restructuring HR. We cannot just restructure HR. We need to restructure work entirely, right? Like, organizations are trying. I've been in a number of them on the consulting side. I've seen a number ranging from 10,000 person companies to 250,000 person companies. We're like, oh wow, we should be more strategic with our procurement, so we don't have 7 different teams using Salesforce, HubSpot, and some other tool, and all these bloated contracts because each team wanted their own technology. Like, we do need to get better, particularly if we want to leverage AI effectively at that, because yes, AI could now integrate your HubSpot and your Salesforce, and all you're going to be doing is making these B2B SaaS companies rich, because you have all these contracts and all these tools. You don't need all those tools if you're more strategic, right? And you have kind of like the underlying frameworks. And so that's just from an IT lens, but it's also the competencies and the skills of your people. Bringing people together is going to be really high value. And to the question of like the perspective or structure when we think about HR, I have never met someone in HR who's like, I joined because I love typing first name, last name, social security number, date of birth, hitting enter. I love clicking buttons to process a promotion. I absolutely adore going through and updating position information. Oh, I love putting terminations in the system and going through these workflows. It's my favorite thing. Like, I have never met someone in HR who does that. So I do think that while there are opportunities to upskill, most people who are in this space are there for the human support, right? They want to help humans. They want to help humans at work. So I think that initiative is already there. And I think the question is, what are we upskilling them on, right? Like, they can contribute to a lot of things without knowing AI, right? They can contribute to better strategies. They can finally take a moment to be like, oh, what was that thing I studied 10 years ago that I wrote a thesis on, right? We can get back to like that more academic approach to inform that strategy. They can have the time, the cognitive bandwidth to do that research, to be thoughtful, to say, oh, wait, maybe this benefit policy isn't really working. Maybe we need to adjust this. Maybe this is what we need to do to make our employees happier, right? So I think that inherently, like, we have this notion of we need to upskill everyone on what, right? There are areas that we probably need to, but I think we can liberate people and leverage their existing passions and skills to have better outcomes.
For sure. I think, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, Lexi's comment that just came in with what she's seeing as an enterprise agentic AI platform where AI agents can be plugged in. And Adam, it's the one word that you just mentioned in your answer that I was hanging on to: integrate. I just need to reality check our audience for a moment here to say that we do realize that system integrations aren't going away, meaning that the painstaking APIs and all of that fun stuff that we have been dealing with for decades at this point, some of it may still need to be there to make sure that AI agents across different systems work, or agents can plug into a broader platform. So how you structure your data, how you architect everything behind the scenes is still very much driving that part of that conversation. Sorry, Martha, what were you about to say?
No, one thing to that, and then I'll go back to my previous thought, because Lexi's asking, like, do we see anybody doing this? I think I would say most companies are still in the, hey, do we have our, maybe little pilots here and there, single agents, trying to see if their data is in place, maybe starting the process of, we need to figure out a way to get all of our data feeding into a certain place. I don't know that we're going to have too many companies yet on like having an enterprise-wide orchestration, but I wouldn't be surprised if that starts happening soon. But listening to Adam, kind of when he was talking about, people didn't join HR to like enter stuff, right? And they want to work with people. And it got me thinking about, the whole, like earlier we were talking about strategic versus like operations and things like that. Like, I think that element of it, almost like the employee relations element of it, becomes kind of another area, right? Because I've always thought like, okay, I would love to be an HR business partner, but there's no way in heck I could do employee relations. So I probably should not do that kind of job, right? And I just want to do the strategic stuff, the like, hey, let's, understand your business problems and create programs or initiatives or whatever to solve them. I don't want to deal with people problems. But then you have people like, they love helping with people problems. Like, so I think that becomes, it's almost like, as you think about, like our audience, as you think about, your job, and or even not your job, but like the job that you would like to do, or you thought you wanted to do, but you didn't want to do these elements of it, or whatever it may be, like start thinking about which of those could potentially be a candidate for automation, right? And then that gets down to, okay, so if this job is something that would have been interesting to me, but these things I didn't want to do, but now those things can be automated, then maybe that is a job to start getting yourself ready for, right? As just an example. But everybody is drawn to HR for different reasons. Some people are drawn because they want to help people. Some people are drawn for, they want to develop people or what have you. So figure out what your thing is. And then, how is AI going to help you do that better, I guess?
Yeah. Go ahead, Lydia, and then I'll go.
No, I was going to say, I think it's something that you said that was super important. I want to double down on, which is understanding how work gets done. I feel like a lot of times when we talk about AI, are we going? Yes, we're on the same wavelength.
Exactly. That's
a lot of times when we talk about AI, it's like, oh, just throw AI at it. Just like, you don't have clean data, just throw AI at it. Talent acquisition, you can't build a funnel or understand where your funnel looks like, just throw AI at it. It's like, okay, well, if you haven't designed the funnel, if you haven't figured out exactly step by step what step constitutes at what stage of the funnel, throwing AI at it is not going to build you a funnel. It's just going to augment the stuff that you have already done. And if it's crap, well, I think we know what comes out the back end.
And
I
Go
was
ahead,
going to go
Mercedes.
exactly to there. To me, the reason I joined HR and what's most exciting is because I always wanted to match my athletic stuff to performance in the work. And the number one gap that I always saw in HR is that we don't actually understand the work, how the work gets done. And the opportunity to redesign everything based on the tools that we now have now, it's incredibly exciting to me. And a lot of org design professionals, not I, are amazing. And this is such a cool opportunity for that. So the three components are one, yes, the AI tools like ChatGPT, people are using it. We can have policies and guardrails and what have you. But this is moving to a pace which we really, really need to understand what is the outcome that we need with how, the human aspect of it, that how is going to be huge for us too. And the ethics of it, regardless of what's happening out in the world, we need to live by our values and ensure that we're taking a stand. And then how do we organize this to both deploy and like continuously deliver? And then the thirdly, then how do you think about growing and scaling talent? For me, I've always been like, if the lower level kind of work gets done by an agent, how does my kid learn when he's graduate? Well, he dropped out of high school, different story. Different episode, but how do he gets back to learning? Those jobs are going away, and then you have to be an expert. Where does that gap go? So there's so many opportunities for us to reuse what we know and lead, not IT.
And something I just want to chime in with because I'm thinking about it, and it's a very funny thought in my head. But like when we think about AI agents, right, and if we think about like Laura is saying some companies are already using them. When I saw companies using RPA in a past life when they were deploying robotic process automation, they would like automate these financial channels and things like that, which would just spit out a nicer Excel spreadsheet that someone would still have to analyze and do something. So collecting all this information, but still fundamentally not really altering the way we work, right? And we need to kind of think about that. But say we have two agents, one in finance, one in HR, and they're both tasked with the same thing around finding cost savings. Like it could be very interesting if they're both tasked with the same goal, how they might compete with each other, how they may have access to different systems, how same thing in our current environment. If you task two people in different departments who have access to siloed data, siloed pieces of information, different contexts and different experiences. So if we just deploy agents in that same way, we're going to get these same outcomes. And we're just, instead of four human beings arguing in a room, it's going to be four agents arguing in a room.
But and you know what's the best part on all of that? I think going back to like one of our first episodes, we still have an unlearning problem in AI. So now you're training it with wrong data. As human, you're like, okay, fine, I'm wrong. I can rationally understand why you're right. So therefore, I'm going to delete what I know and go with your approach. With AI, I think we've yet to prove that point. The fact that one of those agents can delete what they assume to be true and follow on with a new approach. So I think that would be a really interesting point. I also do want to go back to Laura's comment in terms of seeing agents being used in a lot of companies and ChatGPT sort of as writing sidecar to a lot of the HR BPs. So here's a question. Given the framework of what we set around what truly are AI agents as well as agentic AI, is HR ready for as we stand today, February of 2025? And if yes or if no, like what is practically feasible? Like what is realistic for us as opposed to sort of designing the utopia society of strategic HR and everything along those lines?
Yeah, I can take my point of view and I'm going to link it back to what Lexi is putting in here about the employee life cycle and if we can do that. So one of the things that I did as a PMO was use these life cycles, attract, hire on board, and then productize around that. And I think this is where I need to unlearn everything that I know, because I don't know if that's going to work anymore, because the teammates that are working with you are different. And then we now have the opportunity to cross. So for example, if we're thinking of the employee experience, it's not HR, it's also HR employee tech. So it's other groups of people and how we bring that together. So that seems overwhelming and really big to me. So I don't think we're ready for all of that. But what I do think that we're ready for is, for example, if you pick like a payroll agent or like a specific piece of the process agent and then test it, because that's going to tell us what actually works or not. And then what teammates do you know? And then what kind of downstream impact? I'm going to give you an example that I didn't consider. When I left my last role, I was doing an HR storefront. So that means that now you have these chat bots that you can answer and ask anything, whether it's IT or HR or what have you, and it answers. Well, now on the back end, you don't really need like an HR call center and an IT call center or anything else, because now you can kind of merge them, because that job is it could be a lot easier when you have the information. So I'm very, I don't know yet what that may look like, because from the front end, from the data gathering to the tool doing to the output, to the what jobs it's going to impact, I almost cannot picture it yet until I do one. So hopefully we start with a small one, and then I was asking if other people have done it so that we can learn from their fails and wins. Please take one for the team.
I totally hear you. And it's like every HR department does work a little bit differently, to a point where I question. Where chances are most HR departments are not going to build their own AI agents. We're probably going to buy something out of the box. So from the vendor product design angle, then it becomes, are you going to design something that is flexible to adjust to everyone else's processes? Or are we going to see what we've been seeing in the past little while on HR tech, which is you'll cover 80% of it, but you're still going to make the HR team duct tape the rest of the 20%, which becomes a lot harder in the realm of AI. Martha and Adam, curious to see what your thoughts are on this one.
Well, one of the big things that I'm kind of communicating internally, and I think I've communicated with other people outside the space because it's just my perspective, right? But I also think it makes the most sense in terms of enabling any technology, is we need to focus on the infrastructure and the foundation, right? And to me, that's making sure all of your policies are in one place, right? Making sure you've documented your processes, things like that. I think another challenge that I'm still kind of processing through, and I'm curious on other people's perspectives about, is, okay, we put all our policies and processes in one place and we're training an AI on it. How do we know these are good, right? How do we know that we're doing the work well? And depending on how we leverage AI, and it's really interesting, right? We can have an AI learn from this and then execute our existing processes, but we just went through how some of our processes don't make sense. Have an AI analyze our processes and make recommendations for how our processes should work better. I think there's a lot of options, but I think the first step is really getting everything in one place, because when we think about kind of the future of agents as well, imagine an agent that is actually tapped into our, network of legislation updates and knows when policies need to be updated right away and can alert a human, here, this document in this space needs to be updated. Human comes in, makes that update based on the AI recommendation. It's already now in all systems where people can visualize that policy. The systems exist to do that today, but most companies don't operate in that way. Instead, someone finds out about it, they update the policy document in one place, they email it to somebody else uploads it somewhere. We forget to upload it on this one site that 30% of the employee population goes to, and they're still looking at the policy from 2019. So it's like, these are some of the things that we can do and should have done before, but if there was ever a kick in the rear to do it, I think it might be AI. Right.
I feel like I need to snip that part of the conversation, send it to all of the product managers I know who are designing in HR tech, because that is a reality that doesn't get accounted for. I think in a lot of our prep sessions, we had a little sidebar of like what I foresee as a distance in between what a product team sees, what a sales team sees, what their marketing team sees, what the end buyer sees, and what the ultimate end user sees. And this is exactly it, right? Like, we're designing product assuming a perfect best practice operating environment where everything is sitting under one place. We know exactly what our funnels are. We know exactly what our processes are. We can just code it in. When reality is, I think most HR departments have been scrambling around with a couple fire extinguishers for a good part of the last, I would say, 5 years, that we've almost lost track of our processes, best practices, and things along those lines. Martha, I'd love to get your thought on this one.
No, I mean, I completely agree with Adam on this one in terms of like getting our data. I mean, I don't think some organizations maybe have their processes mapped pretty good, or they have data in a pretty good place. But I would argue, I would wager that most organizations, like HR data, is just notoriously bad, mostly because you have human people entering and not everybody does it consistently because of training or whatever other reasons. But the data and the process and kind of mapping out the process is the first step. And then I do think, maybe not today, but I do think that we will get to a place where if the vendor gets you 80% there, you can then train it on your data and your processes to then get it the rest of the way there. But without that kind of infrastructure, without that laying that foundation, it is going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah, for sure. So we've got about 15 minutes left to this live stream. If you're still with us in the audience and you want to ask us any questions, or if you just want to toss anything at us and let us debate it out, feel free to use the LinkedIn comments and chat for that function. For the team here, I am curious. So we didn't prep for this question. I'm going to ask this. It's going to be a very black and white question. You know how this goes. Adam, this might be your first time, but I always lop out a couple of surprise questions. I am going to start with Martha. I'll move on to Mercedes, and Adam, because you're our guest, I'll give you time to think about it. Okay, here's a question. Is agent for HR good or bad? Martha.
I think it will be good. I think it's going to be a while before we get there, but I think it's going to be good because it's going to enable HR to do things that they haven't had the time to do before. No matter, to our point earlier, no matter what it is that your cup of tea that you like to do. But how many people are bogged down with so many things, not to mention how that trickles down to like people managers and the fact that there's been this like self-service model that's been pushing out because they want to reduce HR headcount. And so now managers have to create their own job requisitions. They have to do all of this stuff on themselves. And, that creates a lot of data issues, first of all. Secondly, that creates a lot of inconsistencies and everything else. So if you can now take that back away from the people managers as well and have agents doing some of that, right? So I do think it's a good thing. It's just going to be a while before we get there. And we need everybody to kind of, do their part in learning and getting themselves ready for the future.
Gotcha. Mercedes?
Neither good nor bad. It's a thing, and it's what we make of it. But I, for me personally, it's an enormous opportunity to do things that we were never able to do in the past. And I know we talk a lot about unlearning and the mindset, and that's very important because we do have to think completely differently. But the more I'm out there in the world researching, the more I go back to it is going to be about values. It's going to be like what we value and what we determine. And not just by words, but by actions, because we're seeing so much of that performative masks coming off in the past year. This was happens with chaos. So I think it's an enormous opportunity. I think we really, really need to catch ourselves when we're thinking the same way that we did everything before. And then don't even ask AI, how do you think differently about this? Because we have an opportunity to reshape without some of the constraints that we've had all the time before. And we can make a very cool, inclusive future. We really can. We really, as a Latina, I'm telling you, I'm excited about the opportunities for inclusivity. And we all have bias that will always exist, but in a bias that's more positive. And how we can make things more human. But if we do not take that opportunity and we do not do core values, human first versus profit first, we're going to have social unrest. And then more to the right and the right and the right, like the cycles of the world through all history that was like this. Yeah. Nothing new, but just more scary and faster.
Scary and faster is probably, yeah. Those would have been the two keywords I would have gone for. Adam?
Yeah, I am positive. Yeah. I remain optimistic.
Yes, I think I echo Mercedes' sentiment heavily, right? Technology is never good or bad, right? Nuclear power could do amazing things for energy and renewable energy. It can also blow entire cities and countries up, right? AI, similar implications. It's kind of how we use it. Agents, specifically in HR, depends how we use it. I am optimistic, but of course, if we implement these tools in a way that just helps us fire people faster and replace people faster, we could, right? It's probably not that efficient, but in theory, it's probably just efficient enough to continue generating enough revenue and capital that companies could do that and, still keep their stock price where it's at. At the same time, we could increase the stock price double if we actually took care of our people. And if we used AI to improve, the creativity and the innovation, if we used it to foster psychological safety, right? If we could actually improve equity and belonging, inclusion and belonging and equity through actually, peeling back the data. There are all these things that we don't tackle in HR because it's scary, right? Like trying to make pay equal because we grew over time and acquired a bunch of different companies or people's pay bands were different. Super scary. What if we could actually look at all of the data, leverage tools that can process things way faster than our human brains can, and actually have really informed conversations around it instead of just being like, this is too scary a problem for us to solve. So I am optimistic that there's a lot of really, really hard problems that with AI and, humans working together, we can actually start to crack away at those. And hey, if now is the time where, a new Netflix emerges and some companies go the way of Blockbuster, that might be better for us. Maybe we need some new enterprises to emerge that can inherently pay people more fairly, that can inherently, out of the box, or out of the gate, do this better, leverage AI to build a better organization, build a better space, build a better place for us all to work together.
Yeah,
And I was
totally
listening
agree.
I listened to a podcast this morning that was talking about something along those lines, right? They were saying that the companies that have this short, like quarter by quarter mentality because of shareholders and stuff like that, those are the ones that are going to be making the decisions that are maybe not human centered, right? That like, hey, we're going to introduce this, which means we're going to be able to cut headcount and this, that, and the other. Whereas the organizations that really are thinking like, how do we give this to our people to make so that we can like produce more value with our current headcount, right? As opposed to trying to reduce costs. Those are the companies that it's going to be a slower journey for them. Like it's going to take them a little bit longer, but a year or two out, they're going to be leapfrogging their competitors in terms of the value that they're going to bring. And then you're going to start to see, to your point, Adam, more like blockbusters, I think, as that kind of happens. But I have a question. I'm going to be the one to throw a question now, Lydia. I'm taking the mic from you. So,
She's
and I think
empowered.
we've danced like on both of these themes, but I just kind of want to clarify like there's two different things that we're talking about. One is like agents for HR and what do we as HR need to do in order to be able to do that effectively, this and the other. The other is agents across the enterprise and what's HR's role in that. And I think those are two different things. And unfortunately, I haven't seen a whole, like, next I'm looking at like job descriptions and all that stuff, trying to see like what's going on. I haven't seen a whole lot of HR roles popping up that are, I've seen like maybe, and I even had ChatGPT with like the search function on, like, help me, like, hey, can you find jobs where it's like somebody that's partnering, collaborating with like IT and everything else around agents and how we're going to be introducing AI across the organization. I'm seeing it's like, when I have seen it within within HR, it's specifically for an HR use case. Any other roles that I'm seeing that's talking about like implementing AI agents and so forth sits somewhere else in the organization, like operations or IT or whatever it may be. Like, is anybody seeing a different pattern, or are you all seeing the same thing? And does that concern you?
I've seen, we have already operations office and like PMOs and all that stuff, but I've seen transformation offices that then just disrupt everything else because now you have that and then HR becomes just like a stakeholder within that. But you're correct. I have not seen that. And it's the same as we did with agile transformation because we don't understand the work. Is how you do it within HR and how you do it for the enterprise. And no, I don't see that, or a lot of the conversations within the HR
And I think
conversations that I've had.
it's a really big opportunity because I'm thinking back to what Laura said earlier. Like imagine, and this is utopia maybe, but imagine a world where like chief data officers reported into CHROs or something, like where data was actually directly connected to HR instead of, typically kind of funneling or being adjacent to operations, technology, information, right? That would be interesting. And it's the same thing that we see with AI right now, right? Is AI is either sitting under finance, some sort of transformation leadership, or technology. It's not sitting under HR. And now I kind of come full circle back to the Jensen Huang quote of, IT is the new HR. No, maybe I'm coming full circle back to, I don't agree with Martha's synergy statement earlier. I think in the current environment, HR has to be the new IT. Because to what you just said, Martha, right? If HR wants to serve its purpose and protect its people and drive organizations forward, HR does need to take the reins, and HR needs to be involved in thinking strategically about where agents are deployed, because wherever you deploy agents, you are displacing tasks and ultimately displacing workers, and you need to be prepared for that. And organizations that just deploy agents in their respective verticals because, hey, this is going to make our sales, run faster, are going to run into dangerous scenarios, right? Something when I took the human computer interaction course that I took at MIT that we talked about was an instance where I believe it was Dove. They just mailed iPads to literally all of their door-to-door salespeople, and we're like, "Hey, you guys now have these iPads. You're gonna sell on the tablets." Not only did people not know how to use the tablets, they actually had like 30% of the workforce quit because they didn't like that they were being told to use a new tool to do their work differently, right? And like that sticks with me in terms of like it's gonna be the same in AI. If you're gonna lose the people that you actually need because you just try to run roughshod with these agents. And again, I think that HR needs to have a seat at the table, whether that's we need to force ourselves in at the table, or whether it's we get a welcome invitation. I think we do need to be in that space because I think there's a lot of danger, and it does seem to be the trend right now that these teams are just running things autonomously without HR thinking about how does this impact our humans.
So can I actually take us a step back here? Martha, to your question, no, I haven't seen it yet. But I think in taking us a step back, we might be able to answer the reason why we haven't seen it yet. I'm of the mind, HR, IT, going back to the start of our conversation, who's going to be the new whom, it's a matter of who can flip their thinking and frame their thinking for the AI era as opposed to using the internet era tools. Because what you're seeing and what Adam is describing to me are companies and functions operating because of in a period of rapid change and resorting to what they know best, which is how we have done things in the internet and enterprise SaaS era. If you think about how sort of cloud and everything else came about, how mobile came about and all of that fun stuff, it was exactly the framework that you described, right? Like IT went first, enterprise went first, HR kind of just skidded along a little bit and eventually got into it. But there was always a 2-3 year lag. It was never a everybody all at once, let's figure it out. AI doesn't afford us that courtesy where everyone can be a part of it and HR can just kind of hang out in the back a little bit and then participate in the conversation later. You almost have to be a part of it. And to Adam's point of sort of like HR needing to inject itself and lead, that's to me almost like HR's view from the internet era of like, I need to be a part of this. I'm going to kick and scream until you make me a part of this because I, as HR, hold a part of your solid assets in terms of the proprietary knowledge around compliance, policies, regulation, whatever it may be that manages a people part of your entire organization. Except I think from the enterprise stand, they need to understand that AI agents are going to be a part of the organization. HR needs to be a part of that operating framework conversation. From an HR stance, it's almost like we as an industry need to understand that every piece of knowledge that we held near and dear, all of the 20, 30 years of experiences of regulation compliance, it's coded in a system right now. So it's kind of like we, in a way, lost our leverage in how we have had these conversations in the internet era. So it's about how do you create that new leverage and identifying what that new leverage is going to be that's going to bring you back into the table. So I think I'm still waiting for that race to come out and see which function is going to come ahead, quite honestly.
But both of those conversations are technology driven, right? Like where I bring us back is like the values, because the new people in the marketplace are new customers. They want to vote and align with what they think is true and right, and an employee value proposition and the humanness and empathy. And I care about this and I care how we do it. All of those human things that are going to be so important again, that's what we can reclaim back and also give the guidelines for doing like the governance across the enterprise for how to do it in alignment to our business outcomes, in alignment to our customers. So I think we have still an opportunity, but we still need human first, human centric, and then the tech as enabler.
Yeah, for
I'm
sure.
going to say, to me,
Go for it.
sorry, it doesn't matter who leads it, as long as everybody's sitting at the table and having a say and having, I mean, the who leads it part, like that's probably a headache for that person anyway. As long as HR has a seat at the table and is able to influence how things are being implemented and so forth, to me, that's what's important. But
as long as it's a human.
I was going to say, no, Mercedes, we had, I think, that little banter back and forth previously about how, rather than CEOs replacing all their workers with AI, maybe we need to replace CEOs with AI. Or maybe it is an AI that's leading everything. Maybe it is something that's our collective inputs and consensus, and there is not one person who is deciding it. It's
we'll
that collective consensus. So.
I mean, there's something to be said about bringing the humanness back, but I think there's also a fine balance where AI can
Yeah.
take the emotion out of a lot of conversations that
Yeah.
are incredibly fueled by emotion today.
Yeah.
Okay, so last couple minutes, rapid fire, 2 questions, ideally 2 sentences each from everyone. This time, Adam, I'm going to start with you. We'll circle to Mercedes and we'll end up with Martha last. Number 1, where do you see this conversation in 6 months from now? So gaze into your crystal ball as we speak and figure out where we're going to be. Number 2, if anyone's listening to this at this moment, sometime in February, March of 2025, what would you tell them to get off this call and do immediately so they can become a part of the conversation, they can propel the conversation forward?
Sure. So I think to the first question 6 months from now, I think we're gonna not have seen that much. I think we'll hear a lot in the news. We'll see new products released. Maybe ChatGPT will drop ChatGPT 5. I think organizations are going to continue to kind of move slowly and kind of bulkily. Maybe we'll hear about some new launches and product launches, but we were talking about this before as well. Implementation, it takes a while to get all the right people together to connect these systems. It's not that simple, even with AI, to just unplug your HCM and unplug your payroll system and reconfigure everything. So I think in 6 months, hopefully we'll see some steady progress. And I think I'll lead that into the second piece, which is right now, like if you feel behind, if you're not sure what you're doing, like one, go out and start to get educated. Look at like, some of the subscribe to Lydia, boom, like, follow Lydia, follow the people on this call, like, stay in tune with what's going on. And then again, really focus on data, process, tasks. Do you know what you do on a day-to-day basis? Are you self-aware about that? And I think as you kind of break that down, think about what tasks you like and don't like. Really start to think about what the future of your work could look like. And that I think can be highly informative and empowering.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Mercedes?
The plus one to what you said, and then in the next 6 months, I'm looking to the different experiments people are doing, build versus buy. So people that are using, I don't know, within Workday, they have agents. How does that work? People that are building their own, and what new technologies are coming. So I'm very curious to see how other try the plans for us to see which one killed us. And then the second piece is what to do immediately. Go watch people do that. A lot of people are putting demos on there using the tools. Go do that. Ping somebody that you know, be like, hey, teach me how to do this X, Y, and Z. Just get your hands in there. Nobody knows what we're doing still. Like, don't feel like you're falling behind. It's right on time. Let's go.
All right, Martha?
So 6 months from now, I think we are going to be moving slowly because companies have already thrown a lot at trying different AI and they're not seeing the productivity improvements that they were hoping for. So they're going to start scaling back and trying to say, okay, let's take this a step at a time because money is with high interest rates is not easy to get their hands on. In terms of what you can do, I'm going to just echo everything everyone else said. Start getting informed about agents. You don't have to know all the technical ins and outs, but understand, like generally speaking, how do they work, where can they be used, and then to how does that impact your job and what do you need to do to prepare?
Awesome. Thank you all for that. And that brings us a little past the top of the hour. We're over time, but it's all good. Thank you, Adam, so much for joining us this month on the HR Tech Couch Club. If you're listening to us, stay tuned. This is now a monthly thing, I think, that we're starting, or we have already started. Next month, we are excited to bring you the other angle of the HR Tech conversation, which is how do salespeople and account executives think about vendor relationships and think about selling relationships in the entire HR Tech ecosystem. So super excited to have that conversation. And I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I have this week. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Oh.